You came back for me, but I'm nobody. No, sweetheart, you're the reason we're all still breathing. The whole town stopped moving. The second 400 motorcycles came growling down Maple Street through 6 inches of fresh snow. Windows rattled. Doors flew open. Grown men who feared nothing stood frozen on their porches, watching the most dangerous-looking riders in America roll straight toward the smallest, most broken-down house on the block, where a 9-year-old girl in a wheelchair sat waiting at the door. She wasn't afraid. She was the only one who wasn't, because she knew every man out there, and they had come back for her. Before we go 1 inch further, if a story about kindness still means something to you, hit that subscribe button and the little bell. Stay with me all the way to the end, because this one earns it. And down in the comments, tell me the city you are watching from tonight. I want to see just how far little Chloe's story is going to travel. The engines came like thunder rolling downhill. Not the kind that passes, the kind that arrives. Old Mr. Perkins from 2 doors down would tell people for the rest of his life that he thought it was the end of the world. He'd been shoveling his walk, cursing the snow when the sound hit the ridge road above town and just kept building. 400 engines, 400 headlights cutting through the falling white, and every last one of them pointed at the same little house. Martha, he called back through his screen door, his voice shaking. Martha, get out here. You need to see this. His wife came out, drying her hands on a dish towel, and dropped it in the snow. Across the street, a mother pulled her 2 boys back inside and locked the door. The gas station attendant walked out into the road and just stood there, mouth open, hands hanging at his sides. Nobody understood it. Nobody could, because from the outside, it looked like a nightmare finally coming true. It looked like every warning they'd ever whispered about those people. The leather, the patches, the chrome and the smoke and the sheer rolling size of it. But on the porch of the house at the end of Maple Street, a girl who couldn't walk gripped the arms of her too small wheelchair and leaned forward. And she smiled. Chloe, her mother's voice cracked behind her. Chloe, baby, come inside. Come inside right now. No, Mama. Chloe, it's them, the girl whispered. Mama, it's them. They came back. Her mother didn't understand. Her father, standing in the doorway with a wrench still in his fist like it could do a thing against 400 men, didn't understand either, but Chloe did. She had been waiting 3 days for this without ever once saying she was waiting. Now to understand why 400 of the most feared men in the country rode through a blizzard to a house that half the town wouldn't have crossed the street to help, you have to go back. You have to go back to the coldest week that little Tennessee town had ever lived through, and you have to start where every real story starts, with the person nobody bothered to look at. Chloe Anderson had spent all 9 years of her life proving people wrong. She'd been born with a condition in her legs. The doctors had a long name for it that her parents had learned to say without crying, and Chloe had learned to say without flinching. What it meant in plain words was that her legs would never carry her the way other kids' legs carried them. So the world got to decide who she was before she ever opened her mouth. She figured that out early, earlier than a child should. Look at the poor thing, she'd hear a woman murmur in the grocery store, thinking a child in a wheelchair couldn't hear as well as she couldn't walk. Bless her heart, another would say in that voice people use when they mean the exact opposite of a blessing. At school, it was worse because at school it was other children, and children haven't learned to hide it yet. Why does she even come, a boy named Tyler said once loud enough, the way boys do when they want to be heard while pretending they don't. She can't do anything anyway. Chloe heard it. She always heard it. But here is the thing that nobody in that town understood about Chloe Anderson. The thing that would eventually bring 400 men to her door. She never once let it turn her mean. She could have. God knows she had reason to. Instead, she did something harder. She kept noticing people. She noticed the janitor, Mr. Owens, who mopped the halls with a bad back and never got a thank you. And every single morning that she'd wheel up to him and say, "Morning, Mr. Owens. The floors look real nice." And every single morning that tired old man's face would change like somebody had turned a light on inside it. "Morning, Miss Chloe," he'd say. "You're the only one who notices, you know that." "I know," she'd say. "That's why I do it." She noticed the new kid nobody talked to, and she rolled up beside him at lunch and split her cookie in half. She noticed the lunch lady's swollen feet and told her she should sit down more and mend it. Chloe Anderson had lost the use of her legs, but she'd been given something instead, a heart that still saw people. A heart that noticed the exact thing everyone else had trained themselves to walk right past. And she had no idea, not yet, that a heart like that is the rarest and most dangerous thing in the world, because it changes people, whether they want to be changed or not. Her teacher, Mrs. Callahan, saw it too. She kept Chloe back one afternoon after the others had banged out the door to their buses. "Chloe, can I ask you something?" "Yes, ma'am." "Tyler said something ugly to you today. In front of everyone. I saw your face." The teacher sat down at a child-sized desk so she'd be at eye level. "It hurt you. I know it did. So why did I catch you sharing your lunch with him at recess an hour later?" Chloe thought about it the way she thought about everything, like it mattered. "Because he only said it because somebody probably says stuff like that to him at home," she said. "You don't get that mean unless somebody made you that way." Mrs. Callahan had been teaching for 22 years. She had to turn her face to the window for a second. "How old are you again?" she finally managed. 9. 9? The teacher repeated, shaking her head. Lord, that was the thing about Chloe. She kept doing that to grown adults. Kept saying the one true thing they weren't ready to hear from a child. She'd become the person who saw everybody. And nobody, not one single person in that whole town, ever stopped to wonder who was seeing her. Home was a small house at the dead end of Maple Street, and it was falling apart a little faster than her father could patch it. The Andersons weren't lazy people. Nobody worked harder. That was almost the cruelty of it. Her mother, Sarah, worked doubles at the diner out on Route 9, came home smelling like coffee and grease feet screaming, and never once let Chloe see how tired she really was. Her father, Dan, had been in the best mechanic in 3 counties before the accident. A truck had come off a jack wrong and crushed 2 fingers on his right hand and did something to his back that no doctor had ever fully fixed. He still worked. He worked in pain every single day out in the cold garage because stopping meant not eating, and not eating was not an option in a house with a sick little girl. They never complained, not to Chloe, not to each other where she could hear, but Chloe knew. You cannot hide the truth from a child who watches people for a living. She saw the envelopes on the kitchen table, the ones stamped in red, the ones her mother would slide into a drawer the second she noticed Chloe looking. She heard the numbers late at night through a bedroom wall that was too thin to hold a secret. Can't cover both, Dan. The therapy or the truck payment. We can't do both this month. Then we skip the truck. You can't get to work without the truck. Then I'll walk. I'll walk to work before I take one more thing away from her theory. I mean it. A long, terrible silence. Then her mother very quietly. She heard us last week. She didn't say anything, but she heard us. I know. She started saying she doesn't need the new chair. Dan, she's outgrowing that chair. It's hurting her back, and she looked me dead in the eye and told me she doesn't need it because she doesn't go anywhere anyway. 9 years old, and she's already learning to want less so we don't have to hurt. And on the other side of that wall in the dark, Chloe Anderson lay very still and stared at the ceiling and made herself a promise. I will never be the thing that breaks them. She was 9 years old, and she had already decided to disappear a little if that's what it took to keep her family standing. That's who she was the week the storm came. A girl who noticed everyone, deciding quietly that the kindest thing she could do was to need nothing at all. Remember that, because it's about to matter more than anything. The blizzard didn't sneak up. The weatherman on Channel 6 had been sweating about it for 3 days, calling it names. Historic, once in a generation, the kind of system this region simply does not see. At the diner, folks laughed it off the way small towns always do. They said the same thing in 2009, and we got 2 inches in a day off school. Sarah's coworker, Donna, said, refilling a coffee. This one's different, said a trucker at the counter, and he said it in a way that made the whole diner go quiet for a second. I just came down off the interstate. It's already white out up on the ridge. You don't want to be caught out in it. Nobody does. By the time Sarah drove home that night, the first flakes were coming down fat and fast, and something in her chest tightened. Dan, she said, coming through the door, stamping snow off her shoes. It's starting. Donna says the school's already talking about closing. Good, Dan said. Chloe stays home. We all stay home. We ride it out. Ride what out? Chloe asked, wheeling in from her room. Just a little weather baby, her mother said, and smiled. And it was a good smile, a mother's smile, the kind meant to make a hard thing sound small. But that night the wind came up like a living thing. It didn't howl, it screamed, it threw itself against the little house at the end of Maple Street like it had a grudge. The power flickered once, twice held. The lights dimmed and buzzed. Chloe sat by the front window with a blanket over her legs, watching the snow come down so thick the streetlight at the corner turned into a blur, then a smear, then nothing at all. "Come away from the window, honey," her father said. "You'll catch a chill." "I like watching it." "I know you do." He knelt beside her chair, his bad hand resting on the armrest. "Chloe," he said low, so her mother in the kitchen wouldn't hear. "I know things have been hard. I know you've heard things you shouldn't have heard. I want you to know, your mama and me, we're gonna figure it out. All of it. You don't carry any of that. That's ours to carry. You understand me?" Chloe looked at her father's hand, the two crooked fingers, the scars. "You work so hard, Daddy," she said. "Everybody who comes to town looks right past you, like they don't even see." Dan Anderson opened his mouth to answer and found he couldn't. "That's all right," Chloe said, patting his ruined hand with her small one. "I see you." He had to get up and go stand in the kitchen for a minute after that. He told his wife he was checking the back door. He was wiping his eyes. The storm got worse. Nobody in that town slept easy that night, but the Andersons slept eventually. Sarah dead on her feet from the double, Dan aching in every joint, both of them worn down to nothing. Chloe couldn't sleep. Her back hurt in the old chair. It always did now. So she did what she always did when she couldn't sleep. She wheeled herself quietly to the front window to watch the world, and that's when she saw it. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks. A light. Way up on the ridge road, the one that curved down into town, a single weak light wavering in all that white. Then another beside it. Then a whole cluster of them, faint and scattered, and stopped. Lights don't stop on the ridge road at 3 in the morning, in the middle of the worst storm in the county's history. Unless something's wrong. Chloe pressed her face to the cold glass. She could just make out shapes now in the flare of those lights. Big shapes, machines tipped and struggling, and figures. Small dark figures moving between them, then not moving. Then one of them fell. She watched a dark shape go down in the snow up on that ridge and not get back up. Her heart started to pound. "Daddy," she whispered. But her father was a house away, deep asleep for the first time in a week, and something in Chloe, the same something that made her share her cookie, the same something that made her say, "I see," you could not make her wake him just to hear him say, "Stay away from the window." She looked back up at the ridge. The figure still hadn't gotten up, and the snow was coming down harder, now harder than she'd ever seen, and in a few more minutes she wouldn't be able to see them at all. And Chloe Anderson understood something with the awful clarity that only comes at 3 in the morning. Nobody else was awake. Nobody else could see them. Just her. The girl nobody looked at was the only one looking. She almost went to wake her parents. She had her hand on the wheel to turn back. And then she heard her father's voice in her head from just a few hours before. "That's ours to carry, Chloe, not yours." And she heard her mother's voice through the wall. She started saying she doesn't need anything. They were so tired. They were so used up. What could they even do, her father with his back up a frozen ridge road in the dark? Get himself killed. Get the truck stuck. One more disaster on a pile of disasters they couldn't afford. But somebody up on that ridge was lying in the snow. Chloe looked at the phone charging on the side table, and her whole small body went cold with a different kind of cold because she suddenly understood exactly what she was going to do and exactly how much trouble it might bring. She wheeled herself to the table. She picked up the phone. Her hands were shaking. She didn't dial 911 first. Later, everyone would ask her why, and she'd say the honest thing, the thing that told you everything about her. "I called the man who helps people for free because I didn't want anybody to get a bill they couldn't pay." His name was Earl. Earl ran the little towing outfit off Route 9, and he was known for one thing: he pulled stranded folks out of ditches at no charge, said the good Lord had blessed him with a truck, and it'd be a sin to make a scared person pay to be unscared. Chloe knew his number because Earl came into the diner, and Chloe noticed people, and Chloe remembered. He answered on the 5th ring, thick with sleep. "Earl's towing. If this ain't an emergency, I'm gonna..." "Mr. Earl, it's Chloe Anderson, Dan and Sarah's girl." A pause. "Chloe, honey, it's 3 in the morning. What in the world?" There's people stuck on the Ridge Road, she said fast, all in one breath. The one that comes down into town. There's a lot of them. Motorcycles, I think. And one of them fell down and he's not getting up. And it's snowing so hard, Mr. Earl and I don't think anybody else can see them. But me and I didn't know who else to call. Who wouldn't? Whoa, whoa, slow down, baby. Motorcycles. In this, Earl was moving now. She could hear him. Are you sure nobody'd be fool enough to be on a bike in? I'm sure. There's lights all stopped and shapes and one of them fell. Please, please, before the snow covers them up. Earl was quiet for 1 second. And here's a thing about that town that people forgot when they were busy being afraid. There were good people in it too. Chloe, Earl said, and his voice had gone hard and awake and kind all at once. You did the right thing calling me. You hear the exact right thing. I'm getting my truck. You stay warm. You stay put. And baby, I'm real glad you noticed. He hung up. And Chloe sat there in the dark, her heart going like a hammer. She should have been able to go back to bed then. She'd done her part. She'd called for help. Help was coming, but she couldn't stop looking at that ridge because the figure still hadn't gotten up. And Earl was 15 minutes away minimum in this weather. Maybe 20, maybe more. And a man can freeze in a lot less than 20 minutes. She sat there fighting with herself, and it was the hardest fight of her 9 years. Because there was nothing she could do. She knew there was nothing she could do. A girl who couldn't walk in a blizzard up a mountain road. The idea was insane. Her father would have a heart attack. She'd freeze before she got past the mailbox. Stay put, Earl said. That's ours to carry, her father said. She looked down at her legs under the blanket, the legs that never did what she needed them to. And for one bitter, ugly second, the only one anybody ever heard her admit to Chloe Anderson hated her chair. Then she looked back at the ridge, and the figure moved, just a little, an arm coming up, reaching toward the lights of the town, toward her window, though of course whoever it was couldn't have known there was a little girl there watching, willing them to live, reaching for anybody. And something broke open in Chloe's chest, not fear, not pity, but the pure, furious refusal that lived at the center of her, the thing that made her who she was. You are not going to lie there and die while I watch you through a window and do nothing. She turned her chair, she rolled to her parents' door, and she did the thing she'd sworn she'd never do again. The thing that cost her the most, more than the cold, more than the fear. She woke them up. She let herself be a problem. She let herself need something out loud at 3 a.m. because a stranger's life was worth more than her pride. Daddy, she pounded on the door with both fists. Daddy, Mama, wake up. Wake up. There's people dying on the ridge. Wake up. The door flew open. Her father, wild-haired, terrified, dropping to his knees in front of her chair. Chloe, what is it? What's wrong? Are you hurt? I'm not hurt. Daddy, listen to me. Listen. She grabbed his ruined hand in both of hers and held on with everything she had. There's people stuck up on the ridge in the snow. Bikers. A lot of them. One of them fell and he's freezing. And I called Mr. Earl, but he's 20 minutes out. And Daddy... Her voice cracked, and the words that came next were the truest words she'd ever say. Daddy, they're the kind of people everybody drives past. They're the kind nobody stops for. And if we don't help them, nobody's going to. Dan Anderson stared at his daughter. His broken, brilliant, impossible daughter, who had every reason on this earth to think only of herself and never once did. Behind him, Sarah was already up, already pulling on her coat over her nightgown, because that's who those two people were. That's where Chloe got it. Get the truck keys, Sarah said. Sarah, the Ridge Road in this. Get the truck keys, Dan. Chloe watched her mother's face, her father's face. Watched the fear in them. Real fear, the road was deadly. They all knew it, and watched them decide to go anyway. Because their little girl asked. Because it was right. You stay here, her father said to Chloe, grabbing his coat. You stay warm. You keep that phone in your hand. If the power goes, you call me. You hear me? You did good, baby. You did so good, but you stay put. And Chloe Anderson, who had spent her whole life being told to stay put, to want less, to take up as little room as she could, looked her father dead in the eye. She said. Chloe, they fell because nobody sees them, she said. I'm coming because I want them to see somebody was there. I want them to know somebody came. Her father opened his mouth to say no. Her mother put a hand on his arm. And outside and over the scream of the wind, a new sound rose up from the ridge, faint, ragged, impossible, but real. The sound of grown men calling for help. The Andersons froze, all three of them listening. Dan looked at his wife. He looked at his daughter, small and fierce and already reaching for her coat. Then he made the decision that would change all of their lives, and though he had no way of knowing it yet, would one day bring 400 motorcycles thundering down Maple Street to the door of the smallest house in town. Get her coat, he said. Get her blankets, all of them. He was already pulling on his boots. And Sarah, get the big flashlight. If she's coming, then we are not leaving a single one of those men up on that mountain. Chloe grabbed the wheels of her too small, too tight, back-aching chair. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like the girl nobody saw. She felt like the only one who ever had. Out in the dark, up on the ridge, one of the strongest and most feared men in the state of Tennessee lay in the snow with his life running out of him, a man with a leather vest and 100 tattoos and a face that made people cross the street, a man everyone had learned to look away from. And the last thing he expected, too, the very last thing on God's earth, was that the one person coming to save him would be a 9-year-old girl who couldn't walk. But she was coming. Through the worst storm the county had ever seen, in a wheelchair, with her whole terrified family behind her. She was coming. And nothing about that town or that man or those 400 riders would ever be the same again. The truck wouldn't start. Dan turned the key and the engine coughed, died, coughed again. Nothing. No, he breathed. No, come on. Daddy, Chloe's voice from the back seat bundled in 3 blankets. What's wrong? Cold's got the battery. He turned the key again. The engine groaned like a dying animal. Come on, you old girl, not tonight. Please, not tonight. Sarah put her hand on his arm. Dan, I know. Those men, I know, Sarah. He turned the key a 3rd time, and this time he held it, and the whole truck shuddered, and Chloe squeezed her eyes shut and did the only thing she knew how to do, which was to whisper please under her breath, and the engine caught with a roar and held. Nobody in that truck breathed for a second. Then Dan Anderson threw it in gear. Everybody hold on, he said. This is going to be the worst drive of my life. He wasn't exaggerating. The road up to the ridge was barely a road in good weather. In this, it was a white, nothing, a suggestion, a place where the ground stopped and the sky started, and you couldn't tell which was which. Dan drove it at 10 miles an hour with his whole body leaned forward over the wheel, both hands white-knuckled, his bad fingers screaming, and he never once slowed to complain about the pain because his little girl was in the back seat telling him where to go. Left, Daddy. The lights are more to the left. I can't see any lights, baby. They're there. I saw them. Trust me. Left. And here is a thing that a lifetime of noticing had done for Chloe Anderson. While her father was blind and all that white, while her mother's eyes darted uselessly across the windshield, Chloe had been staring at that ridge for 20 minutes straight, memorizing it, and some part of her held the map of it now clear as a photograph. Left, she said again, certain. And there's a curve coming, a sharp one. Slow down before it, or we'll go right off the edge. Dan slowed. The curve came exactly where she'd said, a wicked hook of road with nothing but empty dark beyond it. If he'd been going 1 mile an hour faster, they'd have gone over. How? Sarah started. She sees things, Dan said quietly, easing around the curve. She's always seen things. Right, baby. Right, Daddy. Now go straight. We're close. They came over the top of the rise, and the headlights swept across a scene that made Sarah Anderson put her hand over her mouth. Motorcycles. A dozen of them, at least, maybe more, some upright installed, some tipped over in the drifts, half buried already. And men. Big men in leather, some crouched and shivering, some huddled together for warmth. One of them up and waving his arms at the headlights like a drowning man at a passing ship. And one of them off to the side, not moving. Face down in the snow, the one Chloe had watched fall. There, she said, and her voice broke. Daddy there. He's the one. He's the one who fell. Dan brought the truck to a stop and was out the door before it fully quit rolling. The waving man staggered toward him, and up close he was enormous, a wall of a human being, his beard crusted white with ice, his eyes wild with relief and disbelief. Thank God, the man choked out. Thank God, we've been up here 2 hours. We got a man down. We got a man down. Show me, Dan said. They ran to the fallen figure, and Dan Anderson, who'd seen a lot of bad things in a lot of garages, felt his stomach drop. The man was huge, easily 250 pounds, and he was gray, lips gone bluish. His leather vest covered in patches Dan didn't recognize and didn't stop to read, soaked through and frozen stiff. He wouldn't stop trying to fix the bikes, the bearded man said, dropping to his knees. Kept saying he'd get us all down. Wouldn't quit. Then he just went down and didn't get up. That's Raven. That's our brother. You gotta help him, please. I'm begging you, mister, please. And that's when a small voice cut through the wind. Turn him over. Everyone looked. Dan had carried Chloe out of the truck himself. Blankets and all set her chair right there in the snow because she would not absolutely would not stay in the vehicle. And now she was rolling toward the fallen man, her mother trying and failing to hold the chair back, and she said it again louder. Turn him over. Get his face out of the snow. He can't breathe like that. The bearded giant stared at her, a little girl, in a wheelchair, on a mountaintop, in a blizzard. Do it, Dan said. Do what she says. She knows things. They rolled the big man over. His eyes were half open, not seeing. His breath came in tiny, awful sips. He's alive, Chloe said. He's alive, but he's real cold. He's the worst kind of cold. My aunt was a nurse before she passed, and she told me about this. When people get this cold, their heart can stop if you're not careful. You have to warm him up slow, and you have to keep him awake. You have to keep him awake. She wheeled right up to his head, and she leaned down over him, this enormous, frightening stranger, and she put her small, mittened hand on his frozen cheek. Hey, you have to stay awake now. You hear me? Nothing. Mister? She patted his cheek. Raven, that's your name, right, Raven? His eyes drifted toward the sound. There you go, look at me. Don't you close your eyes, don't you dare. Her voice was fierce now, fierce as it had ever been. You didn't come all this way up this mountain just to fall asleep in the snow. That's a stupid way to go, and you're too big to be stupid. Look at me. And the man they called Raven Ryan Cole, though nobody had said his real name in years, looked at the little girl. And through the fighting and the cold and the closing dark, some part of his frozen brain registered something that made absolutely no sense. A child, talking to him, touching his face, fighting for him. Nobody fought for him. Nobody had fought for him in a very, very long time. His cracked lips moved. Who? He breathed. Who are you? Nobody, Chloe said. I'm nobody. Now stay awake. Dan was already moving. Sarah blankets, get every blanket out of the truck. You, he pointed at the bearded man. And you too, we gotta get him in the cab. We gotta get him warm. Come on, lift with me. Careful, careful. It took 4 grown men to lift Ryan Cole, and Dan Anderson with his broken back was one of them, and he'd feel it for a month, and he never once mentioned it. They got him into the truck cab, wrapped him, cranked the heat until it roared. And the whole time Chloe stayed at the open door holding his enormous cold hand in both of her small warm ones, and she never stopped talking. You stay with me. Tell me your name. Your real name, not the scary one. His eyes flickered. Ryan. Ryan, that's a nice name. Why'd you let them call you Raven? That's a mean-sounding name. Something happened on the big man's gray face then. Something that might, in a warmer place, have been the ghost of a laugh. Long story. Well, you're going to live long enough to tell it to me, Chloe said. That's the deal. You hear, you live, and then you tell me the whole thing. Deal. And Ryan Cole, freezing to death in the cab of a stranger's truck on a mountain in Tennessee, looked at the little girl who wouldn't let go of his hand and made the first promise he'd made to anyone in 15 years. Deal. Then Earl's tow truck came grinding over the Rise headlights, blazing and behind it sirens. Faint, then louder. Somewhere down the line, Earl had made the calls Chloe hadn't wanted to make, and now real help was coming, an ambulance clawing its way up the mountain, a county plow behind it clearing the road inch by inch. But it was too late to matter who got there first, because the man was already breathing easier. Because a 9-year-old girl had refused to let him sleep. The bearded biker, whose name was Tank, stood in the snow watching this, watching a child in a wheelchair drag his brother back from the edge with nothing but her voice and her 2 small hands. And this enormous, frightening man, this man who'd done things he'd never tell a soul, put his face in his hands and wept. I don't understand, he kept saying. I don't understand. Why'd you stop? Nobody stops for us. Nobody ever stops for us. Why'd a little girl? Because she stops for everybody, Sarah Anderson said, wrapping a blanket around his massive, shivering shoulders like he was one of her own. It's just who she is. Now come on, you're freezing too. Get it in the truck. They saved all of them that night. Everyone. 12 riders, cold and scared and half frozen but alive, brought down off that mountain by a broken-down mechanic, a diner waitress, a free-of-charge towman named Earl, and a little girl who couldn't walk. The ambulance took Ryan Cole to the county hospital. Hypothermia, the paramedics said, about an hour more and he'd have been gone. The rest of the riders they thawed out at the fire station, wrapped in foil blankets, drinking coffee that Sarah, who could not stop being a waitress even at 4 in the morning, insisted on pouring for every last one of them. And as the sun came up gray and exhausted over that little town, Chloe Anderson finally fell asleep in her father's arms in the front seat of the truck, still wearing her mittens. She had no idea what she'd started. Neither did anyone else. Because right then in that moment in that town, the 12 men she'd saved were just 12 cold strangers. But those 12 men belonged to something, and that something was about to hear the story. The hospital wouldn't let Chloe in to see him at first. Family-only sweetheart, the nurse said not unkindly 3 days later. I am his family, Chloe said. He made me a deal. The nurse blinked, and that's when a voice came from down the hall, rough and low and unmistakable. Let her in. Ryan Cole was sitting up in the hospital bed, and he looked terrible and he looked alive. And when he saw the little girl roll through his door, something in his hard, scarred face came apart. Hey, Chloe said, you lived. I lived, Ryan agreed. So you owe me a story. He laughed, a real one this time, cracked and painful and real, and it turned into a cough, and Chloe waited it out, patient as a saint, until he could breathe again. You know, he said when he could talk, when I woke up in here, I thought I dreamed you. A little girl on a mountaintop telling a hell's angel he was too big to be stupid. Figured that had to be a fever dream. Hell's angel, Chloe repeated, sounding it out. That's what the patches said. Tank told me. He said you're the ones everybody's scared of. Ryan's face closed up a little. Here it comes, he thought. Here's where she looks at me different. Here's where the kid figures out what I really am. Yeah, he said, careful flat. That's us, the ones everybody's scared of. You should probably be scared of me too, kid. Chloe looked at him for a long moment. Nah, she said. Nah. You held my hand the whole way down the mountain, she said simply. Scary people don't hold your hand like that. They just don't. So I'm not scared. Now tell me the story. Why'd they call you Raven? And Ryan Cole, who had a face that made people cross streets, who hadn't cried in 15 years, and had already cried twice since he woke up in this room, looked at the ceiling for a long time. You really want to know? That was the deal. So he told her. He told her that his name used to be just Ryan, that he'd had a little sister once a long time ago, and that when he was 17 and stupid and angry, he'd run off with a bad crowd and left her behind, and that he'd meant to go back for her, he really had, and that by the time he got his life halfway straight, it was too late. She was gone, an accident, and he'd never gotten to say he was sorry. He told her that the guys started calling him Raven because after that he went dark, went cold, stopped letting anybody in, built himself into something big and frightening so nobody could ever hurt him again, and so nobody would ever get close enough to be hurt by him either. I decided a long time ago that some people are just meant to be alone, he said, that some of us don't get the other thing, the family thing, the being loved thing. I decided that was fine. I built a whole life on deciding that was fine. Chloe listened to all of it, every word, the way she listened to everybody, and when he was done, she was quiet for a minute. Then she said, how old was your sister? When you left. Ryan's jaw worked. 9. I'm 9, Chloe said. I know, he whispered. I know you are. I noticed that right off. That's part of why I'm having a hard time here, kid. You didn't kill your sister, Chloe said. Ryan flinched like she'd hit him. You didn't, she said again, gentle but absolutely certain in that way she had the way that made grown adults have to turn and look out windows. You were 17. 17's practically a kid. You made a dumb mistake like kids do, and then something bad happened that wasn't your fault, and you decided the punishment was that you don't get to be loved anymore. But that's not how it works. Nobody sentenced you to that. You sentenced yourself. And that's the one part you can undo. The hospital room was very quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled. Ryan Cole, 6'4", 250 pounds, covered in the ink of a life he'd built to keep the whole world out, sat in a hospital bed and looked at a 9-year-old girl in a wheelchair and felt 15 years of ice start to crack straight down the middle. "Who are you?" he said, and his voice wasn't flat anymore. It was wrecked. "Where does a kid learn to say things like that?" "I told you," Chloe said. "I'm nobody. Nobody looks at me either, so I've had a lot of time to look at everybody else." And that sentence from that child was the thing that finished it. Because in that moment, Ryan Cole understood that the little girl who'd saved his life had something in common with him that ran deeper than blood. The world had looked at his leather and looked away. The world had looked at her wheelchair and looked away. Two people the world had decided not to see. And of the two of them, the one with every reason to be bitter, the one who'd been handed the harder road, she was the one who'd chosen to keep her heart wide open. She was who he could have been. She was who he should have been. She was in some strange and holy way the little sister he never got to save, showing up 9 years too late to save him instead. He didn't say any of that out loud. He couldn't have. But something crossed his face, and Chloe, who noticed everything, saw it and reached over and put her small hand on his enormous scarred one, the exact same way she'd done on the mountain. "You're going to be okay, Ryan," she said. "You're not alone anymore, even if you don't believe it yet." And Ryan Cole gripped that little hand and finally let himself believe he might be worth saving. He didn't know yet that her family was drowning. He'd find that out soon. Sarah came to pick Chloe up an hour later, and Ryan watched the woman's face as she stood in the doorway, and Ryan Cole had spent a lifetime reading people. You had to in his world, your life depended on it, and he read Sarah Anderson in about 4 seconds flat. He read the exhaustion that went past tired into something bone deep. He read the way her coat was 3 winters old and mended at both elbows. He read the way her eyes did a quick, automatic, involuntary flick to the hospital's little gift shop, and then away the calculation of a woman who could not afford to buy a get-well card. And most of all, he read the thing she was trying hardest to hide, which was fear. Not fear of him, fear of the world. The specific, grinding, sleep-stealing fear of a person who is one bad week away from losing everything and knows it. "Ma'am," Ryan said, "can I ask you something?" Sarah looked at him warily. "All right. That chair your girl's in," he nodded at Chloe. "It's too small for her. She's hunched up in it. It's hurting her back. I can see it the way she sits." Sarah's face went tight, proud and tight and ashamed all at once. "We're getting her a new one," she said. "Soon." And Chloe from her chair said the thing that broke Ryan Cole's heart clean in two. "It's okay, Mama," Chloe said quickly, brightly, the same words Sarah had heard through a bedroom wall. "I don't really need a new one. This one's fine. I don't go anywhere anyway." The silence that followed was terrible. Sarah closed her eyes. And Ryan Cole watched a 9-year-old girl, the girl who dragged him back from death, the girl who saw every single soul in her whole town casually, cheerfully lie about her own pain so her mother wouldn't have to feel bad about being poor. He'd seen a lot of things in his life. That was the one that undid him. "Chloe," he said, keeping his voice easy, keeping it light, because he understood now exactly how much this family was holding and exactly how carefully you had to hold them back. "You mind giving me and your mama 1-minute grown-up talk? Boring stuff." "It's not boring if I listen to it. It's about socks. Hospital sock policy. Very boring." Chloe narrowed her eyes at him. She knew a redirect when she heard one. She was Chloe, but she let it go and rolled out into the hall to say hi to the nice nurse. And Ryan Cole looked at Sarah Anderson and said very quietly, "How bad is it?" "The money, and don't tell me it's fine. I've been poor. I know the fine you're doing, and it's not fine." Sarah opened her mouth to lie, and couldn't. Something about this man, this enormous, frightening stranger, her daughter had saved something in his face, made the lie impossible. Maybe it was that he'd been there. Maybe it was that he already knew. Maybe she was just so tired of carrying it alone that when someone finally gently set down a hand and said, "Let me see," she couldn't keep her grip. "It's bad," she whispered. "It's real bad. Her therapy stopped in the fall. We couldn't cover it. In the truck, both. The new chair's $1,200 we don't have. My husband works in pain every day, and won't see a doctor about his back because a doctor's another bill. And this, she gestured helplessly at the hospital room at everything. This is going to cost us. I know it is. And I'd do it 100 times over. We don't regret 1 second of pulling those men off that mountain. But, her voice finally cracked. But I don't know how we're going to eat this month, mister. I don't know how we're going to do it. And my baby's out there in that hall telling everybody she doesn't need a wheelchair that fits her because she's decided her job is to make herself smaller so my husband and I don't have to hurt. She stopped, pressed her hand to her mouth, horrified at herself at how much she just spilled to a stranger. I'm sorry, she said. I'm so sorry you're recovering. You don't need to hear my Sarah. It was the first time he'd used her name. Look at me. She looked at him. Your daughter saved my life, Ryan Cole said. And I'm not talking about the mountain. Well, the mountain too. But I mean before that. I've been dead a long time, ma'am. Dead inside for 15 years. And your little girl walked up to me, rolled up to me, and talked to me like I was a person and told me things about myself that no preacher or shrink or brother ever could, and she brought me back. You understand, your baby brought me back to life, twice in 1 week. Sarah was crying now, quietly, the way tired women cry without any drama because they don't have the energy for drama. So here's what's going to happen, Ryan said. You're not going to eat this month by yourself. You're not going to carry this by yourself. Not anymore. That's over. That ended the second she put her hand on my face in the snow. We can't take charity, Sarah started. Dan would never. It's not charity. Ryan's voice had changed, gone low and certain, the voice of a man who led men. It's a debt. There's a difference from where I come from. The difference is everything. Charity is something you give somebody who's beneath you. A debt is something you owe an equal. And I owe your family a debt I can't ever fully pay. So you're not going to insult me by calling it charity. Deal. Sarah stared at him. You people have deals, she said faintly. We have codes, Ryan said. It's the only thing we've got. Now, I need you to trust me on something, and I know that's a lot to ask from a man that looks like me. But I need you to not tell Chloe anything about what's coming. Nothing. I need her to be surprised. Can you do that? What's coming? Sarah asked. And for the first time, something like a smile touched the hard mouth of the man they called Raven. I got to make a phone call first, he said, to some brothers of mine. And I got to warn you, ma'am, when I tell them what your girl did, when I tell them a 9-year-old in a wheelchair pulled 12 of us off a frozen mountain and then told me I was too big to be stupid and cracked open 15 years of me being dead inside. His voice thickened. They're going to want to do something. And there's a lot of them, more than you'd think. And when we decide to do something, ma'am, we don't do it small. Sarah didn't understand. She couldn't have. How many is a lot? She asked. Ryan Cole looked at the door where he could hear his little sister's ghost out in the hallway, making a tired nurse laugh for the first time in a double shift. You just make sure that girl is home this weekend, he said, and you tell her to look out her window when she hears the thunder. There's no storm coming this weekend. No, ma'am, Ryan said, there isn't. And Sarah Anderson, who didn't yet understand, took her daughter home and told her husband that a Hell's Angel had called it a debt and not charity, and watched her proud, broken husband sit down at the kitchen table and put his face in his ruined hands. And out in the county hospital, Ryan Cole picked up a phone. Tank, he said when the line connected. It's Raven. Yeah, I'm okay. Listen to me. I need you to get the word out. All the chapters. Everyone we can reach by the weekend. He looked out the window at a gray Tennessee ski. There's a little girl down here in a wheelchair, and we owe her, and we're gonna go show her exactly what she's worth. No, Tank, listen. Not 100, not 200. His hand tightened on the phone. I want every rider who can get here, however many that is. She saved 12 of us, and then she looked me in the eye, and she said she was nobody. He had to stop for a second. So we're going to go prove her wrong, he said. We're going to go show that whole town, and we're going to show her that the girl nobody sees just got seen by 400 of the meanest-looking, softest-hearted men in America. Oh, Sean, you get him, Tank. You get every last one. We ride Saturday. And 2 counties over and 3 states away, in clubhouses and garages and cold, quiet workshops, phones started to ring. And men who scared the whole world started to smile. The phones didn't stop ringing for 3 days. Tank made the first calls himself, and the way he told it later, he'd expected to have to explain. To convince, to sell it. Grown men who'd seen everything don't usually drop what they're doing because somebody says a kid was nice to them. He was wrong about that. "Say it again," said the voice on the other end of the first call. A man named Diesel, 3 states north, who ran a chapter of 40 and had a reputation that made even other bikers careful. "Say the part again about what she said." "She pulled 12 of us off a frozen mountain," Tank said. "In a wheelchair, Diesel, a wheelchair. Kid can't even walk. And after she saved Raven's life, she looked him in the eye and told him she was nobody. Said nobody ever looks at her either." The line was quiet for a long moment. "That the truth," Diesel said finally, and his voice had gone strange. "You're not stretching it because you don't ride 400 miles for a stressed story." "I was there," Tank said. "I held her hand while she poured your coffee at the fire station. I watched a 9-year-old girl wrap a blanket around my shoulders like I was somebody's kid. Diesel, I've never seen anything like it in my life, and I've seen a lot." Another silence. Then Diesel said, "How many we bringing?" "Raven says everybody who can come." "Everybody, everybody," Diesel repeated. "You know what everybody is, Tank? You understand what you're saying?" "I understand exactly what I'm saying." "I'll make some calls," Diesel said. "Give me an hour." He called back in 40 minutes. "That's 60 from me," he said. "And Cypress chapter's in, that's another 30. And I called that boy down in Georgia, and he cried, Tank. He cried on the phone. His girl's in a chair, cerebral palsy. He's bringing his whole crew. That's 40 more." Tank sat down, because it was happening faster than anyone could have imagined, and it wasn't stopping. That was the thing nobody outside the Brotherhood ever understood. The world looked at these men and saw danger, saw violence and noise and things to be afraid of. And some of that, sure, some of that was earned. These weren't choir boys. But underneath the leather, almost every single one of them was a man the world had thrown away young. A man who'd been the poor kid, the beat-up kid, the kid nobody stopped for. A man who'd learned the exact same lesson Chloe learned in her wheelchair, that the world sees one thing about you and decides that's all you are. And now a little girl had reminded them all at once across 3 states of the thing that had made them brothers in the first place. Somebody sees you. Somebody always should. So they came. They didn't advertise it. They didn't put it online. Not at first. Raven had been firm about that. "This isn't for cameras," he told Tank. "This is for her. If the news finds it, fine, but we don't call them. We don't do this to look good. We do it because we owe it." Ryan Cole got out of the hospital on a Thursday. He shouldn't have. The doctor said another 2 days minimum. Ryan signed himself out against advice, and the first thing he did, the very first thing before he even went home, was drive to a medical supply place 2 towns over and walk in still gray in the face and ask to see their best wheelchair. "For a child," he told the salesman, 9 years old, she's got a condition in her legs, and she's outgrowing the one she's in. It's hurting her back, and I want the best one you make, the one that grows with her, the one that gives her the most freedom. I don't care what it costs." The salesman, a mild little man in a sweater, looked up at the enormous, exhausted, tattooed stranger looming over his counter, and something in the man's face made the salesman stop worrying about what he looked like. "The best one we make is expensive," the salesman said carefully. "I heard you the first time," Ryan said. "The best one you make. And I want it fitted right, custom. I've got her measurements." He'd gotten them from Sarah. He pulled a folded, much-handled piece of paper from his vest. "Everything on this list, and I want it wrapped up nice, real nice, like a present, because that's what it is." The salesman looked at the list, looked at the man. "Sir," he said, "can I ask, is this your daughter?" Ryan Cole looked at the piece of paper in his scarred hands for a long moment. "No," he said finally, "she's not my daughter." His jaw worked. "She's the little girl who saved my life, and she thinks she's nobody. And I aim to change her mind about that." The salesman was quiet for a second. Then he said, "I'm going to give you our cost, no markup, and I'm going to fit it myself tonight, personally, and I'm going to stay late to do it. And I don't want to hear one word of argument about it." Ryan started to say something. "Not one word," the salesman said. "You're not the only one who ever wanted to do something that mattered, sir. You're just the only one who walked in my door today with the chance to." And that was the first strange that Chloe Anderson changed without ever meeting. She would not be the last. Word got around town too, no matter how quiet Raven tried to keep it. You can't have 12 men thawing out at a fire station and a little girl calling a tow truck at 3 in the morning and a mechanic wrecking his back on a mountaintop without a town like that hearing about it. Small towns run on story the way engines run on gas. But here's the thing, the town heard it wrong at first. The town heard bikers and the Andersons and coming back this weekend, and the town got scared. They're coming back, old Mr. Perkins said at the hardware store, going pale. The gang. Why would they come back? What do they want with that little family? I heard there's more of them coming, someone else said. A whole mess of them. Somebody said 100. 100 bikers here. That's what I heard. And just like that, fear did what fear always does. It filled in the blanks with the worst possible story. The town that had barely lifted a finger to help the Andersons in 8 years of struggle now got very interested in the Andersons, not to help them, but out of a fear dressed up as concern. Mrs. Callahan, Chloe's teacher, heard the whispers in the school parking lot and felt something go hot and furious in her chest. You should hear yourselves, she said loud enough that 3 other parents turned. That little girl saved 12 men's lives last week, in a blizzard, from a wheelchair. And now the men she saved want to come back and thank her, and you're all standing here acting like it's an invasion. What is wrong with you people? Barbara, you don't know what those kinds of men. I know exactly what kind of man leaves a 9-year-old girl in a wheelchair to fend for herself for 8 years while she takes care of everybody else in this town, Mrs. Callahan snapped. I've been watching it happen, so don't you dare tell me who the dangerous people are. I've got a pretty good idea, and it isn't the ones on the motorcycles. That shut them up, but it didn't stop the fear. Fear like that doesn't stop for one brave teacher in a parking lot. And so 3 days before 400 motorcycles came down Maple Street, the town of that little Tennessee Valley split right down the middle, half of it, afraid, half of it, ashamed, and almost none of it yet understanding what was actually about to happen. Almost none of it, because there was one person who understood perfectly. Chloe didn't know the specifics. Nobody had told her the specifics. Her mother had kept the promise, kept the secret, though it near killed her to do it. But Chloe noticed things. She noticed her mother crying in the kitchen, good crying, the confusing kind, the kind that comes with a hand pressed to the mouth and a phone held to the ear. She noticed her father, who never took charity, who'd sooner starve than ask for help, sitting very still at the table one night after a phone call, not angry, not proud, just quiet with something on his face she'd never seen there before. Something that looked almost like it hurt to be given something. She noticed her mother tell her 3 times in 3 days, "You be home this weekend, baby, Saturday especially. You be home, and you look out the window when you hear it. Hear what, Mama? You'll know. Is it about Ryan?" Her mother's face did a complicated thing. You'll know, baby. So Chloe put it together the way she put everything together, by watching and waiting and noticing. And 2 nights before Saturday, she wheeled herself to her parents' bedroom door, the same door she'd pounded on the night of the storm, and she said, "Daddy." He looked up. "Hey, baby, are the bikers coming back?" The room went still. Dan Anderson looked at his little girl for a long moment. He'd promised to keep the secret, but he'd never in his life been able to lie to those eyes. "How'd you figure it?" he said. "Because everybody's acting scared and happy at the same time," Chloe said. "And Mama keeps telling me to look out the window. And you got that phone call, and you sat like that after." She rolled a little closer. "Is Ryan mad at us? Is that why people are scared?" And Dan Anderson realized his daughter, his brilliant, terrible, noticing daughter, had put together everything except the one thing that mattered. She'd figured out the bikers were coming. She just hadn't figured out why, because in Chloe's whole experience of the world, when a lot of people suddenly came for you, it was never good news. In Chloe's experience, being the center of attention meant being stared at, whispered about, pitied, mocked. In Chloe's experience, a crowd was something that happened to you, not for you. She thought something bad was coming. She'd figured out 100 men were coming to her house, and she'd braced herself for it to be a bad thing, and she hadn't told anyone she was scared because Chloe never told anyone she was scared. "Oh, baby," Dan said, and his voice broke, and he got down off the bed and knelt in front of her chair. No, no, no. Ryan's not mad. Nobody's mad. Chloe, look at me. Look at me, sweetheart. She looked at him. You know how you're always saying you're nobody, Dan said. How nobody sees you. Chloe went very still. Well, her father said, and he was crying now openly. This proud, broken man, you were wrong about that baby. You were so wrong, and on Saturday, a whole lot of people are going to come here to prove it to you. And it's not going to be scary. It's going to be the best thing that ever happened to this family. And I can't tell you more than that because I promised. But I need you to stop bracing. Okay, I've watched you brace for it for 3 days, and it's killing me. Whatever's coming Saturday, it's good. I swear to you on my life, it's good. Chloe looked at her father's tears, and Chloe Anderson, who noticed everything, who read every face, who'd never once in her whole life been fooled, believed him. Okay, Daddy, she said softly, I'll stop bracing. But she didn't. Not all the way. You can't unlearn 9 years of it in one night. She lay awake that night and the next wondering what 100 people could possibly want with her that was good, and no matter how she turned it over, some scared little part of her couldn't make the picture come out right. Because that scared little part of her had never not once been shown what it looks like when a crowd comes for you instead of at you. She was about to find out. The night before, Ryan Cole couldn't sleep either. He was in a motel 2 towns over, surrounded by his brothers. Men who'd ridden in from all directions, filling up every motel and campground and truck stop for 30 miles, more of them arriving every hour, the numbers climbing past anything Tank had promised. 100 had become 200. 200 had become 3. And still they came headlights on the highway all night long, a river of them drawn to a town most of them had never heard of a week ago by the story of a little girl who thought she was nobody. Tank found him standing outside the motel at 2 in the morning staring at nothing. Can't sleep either, huh? Tank said. No. You scared? Ryan laughed low. Yeah, I'm scared. Of what? It's 400 bikers in a wheelchair, brother. Nothing's gonna go wrong. That's not what I'm scared of. Ryan was quiet for a second. I'm scared it won't be enough, Tank. I'm scared we're gonna ride down there with the chair and the money and all of it, and it's gonna be this big, beautiful thing. And then we're going to leave. And she's going to go back to school Monday, and some kid's going to say something ugly to her, and she's going to be right back to thinking she's nobody. You can't fix a thing like that with a wheelchair. You can't buy a kid out of believing she's invisible. Tank didn't have an answer for that. So what do? He said. Ryan looked out at the highway at the endless line of headlights, still coming brothers, who dropped everything ridden through the night, some of them 400 and 500 miles for a girl they'd never met. We show her, Ryan said slowly, working it out as he spoke. We don't just give her stuff. Stuff wears out. Stuff breaks. We give her something she can keep. We make her official. One of us. We make her a member. Not a real patch. She's a kid, but something. Something with our name on it. Something that says these 400 men, these men, the whole world is scared of, they belong to you now. You call, we come. Forever. So that the next time some kid at school says she's nothing, she can just smile because she'll know something they don't. Tank stared at him. She'll know she's got 400 brothers, Ryan finished quietly. And nobody, Tank, nobody who knows they've got 400 brothers ever believes they're nobody again. Tank was quiet for a long moment. Then this enormous bearded man who'd wept twice already this week wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and said, I'll get the guys started on it tonight. The vest, the patch, all of it. We'll have it ready by morning. By morning. By morning, brother, if I gotta wake up every leather worker in 3 counties. He did in fact wake up 2 of them. They didn't mind. When they heard why, they didn't mind at all. One of them, a woman named Rosa, who'd been stitching leather for 30 years, worked through the whole night on a tiny vest, child-sized, and she cried the entire time. And she did the best work of her life. And when Tank tried to pay her, she pushed the money back across the table and said, You bring that little girl by my shop someday. That's my payment. I want to meet the child who did this. By the time the sun came up on Saturday, it was ready. A small vest size for a 9-year-old. And on the back, where a full member would wear the colors of the club, Rosa had stitched something different. Something just for Chloe. Words that Ryan had asked for, that he'd lain awake choosing, that meant more to him than any patch he'd ever worn. It said, the girl who sees us, and under that smaller, forever our sister. Ryan held it in his scarred hands in the gray morning light and couldn't speak for a while. because he'd never had a little sister to give anything to. Not for 15 years, and now he was going to give one everything. "All right," he said when he could talk. His voice was rough. He turned to tank to diesel to the men gathering in the motel lot, more and more of them, hundreds now, a sea of leather and chrome in the cold morning. "All right, everybody knows the plan. We ride in slow. We ride in respectful. No showing off, no revving. None of that. There's going to be scared folks in that town, and I don't want to give them one more reason. We ride in like we're going to church, because in a way," his voice caught, "in a way we are." The men nodded, every one of them. "And when we get there," Ryan said, "you let me go first. You let me talk to her first. And then—" He looked out at all of them, all these frightening, gentle, thrown-away, soft-hearted men. "Then we show that little girl exactly what she's worth, every last one of us. We show her what happens when somebody who's got nothing gives away the only thing they've got. We show her it comes back. We show her it comes back 1,000 times over." Somewhere in the crowd, a big man in the back, nobody ever figured out who started it. He just started clapping. Slow at first. Then the man next to him joined. Then the next. And in 30 seconds, 400 of the most feared men in America were standing in a frozen motel parking lot and applauding a 9-year-old girl who wasn't even there yet, who was 2 towns over, lying awake in a too small wheelchair, still braced, still scared, still not quite able to believe her daddy when he said something good was coming. They mounted up. 400 engines turned over at once, and the sound of it rolled across the valley like the earth itself clearing its throat. And back on Maple Street, in the smallest house in town, a little girl heard something far away. A sound like thunder. Getting closer. She wheeled herself to the front window the way she had the night of the storm, the way she'd wheeled to 100 windows in her life to watch a world that never seemed to watch her back. Her mother appeared in the doorway behind her, hands pressed to her mouth. Her father came and stood beside her chair and put his hand on her shoulder, and she felt it trembling. "Daddy," Chloe whispered as the thunder grew and grew, and the first headlights appeared at the top of the road. "Daddy, what is it? What's happening?" And Dan Anderson, with tears already running down his face, said the only thing he could get out. "Look, baby," he said, "just look. They came back for you." They came down Maple Street slow, just like Ryan promised. No revving, no showing off. 400 engines held to a crawl, rolling in 2 by 2, a river of leather and chrome, moving at the speed of a funeral procession or a wedding march or something older than either. And the whole town came out to watch. They couldn't help it. You can't stay inside for a thing like that. Old Mr. Perkins stood on his porch with his mouth open. Mrs. Callahan came running from 3 streets over in her house slippers, having heard the thunder and known instantly in her bones what it was. The gas station attendant, the hardware store owner, the parents who'd whispered in the school parking lot. All of them out on their lawns and their porches now watching, and the fear was still on some of their faces, but something else was starting to take its place. Because you could see even from a distance that these men weren't coming to take anything. You could see it in the way they rode. Careful, gentle almost. 400 hard men moving through a scared town as soft as they knew how to be. And at the front of it all, leading them, rode Ryan Cole. He pulled up in front of the smallest house on the street and cut his engine, and the 400 behind him cut theirs one after another, a rolling wave of sudden silence that was somehow louder than all the thunder had been. Then it was quiet, so quiet you could hear the wind. And Ryan Cole got off his bike, this enormous man who'd been half dead in the snow 8 days before, and he stood there for a moment looking at the little house and the porch and the girl in the window. Chloe's face was pressed to the glass. Her eyes were huge. And Ryan watched her, and he saw exactly what he'd been afraid he'd see. He saw the bracing. He saw a child who'd been told her whole life that attention meant danger, that a crowd meant cruelty, that being seen meant being judged. And now here was the biggest crowd of her life, 400 strong, all of them looking right at her. And every instinct she had was screaming that something terrible was about to happen. So Ryan Cole did the only thing he could think of to do. He walked up the path, slow, his hands open at his sides. And when he got to the porch, he didn't tower over her chair. He got down, all the way down. This mountain of a man knelt on the frozen porch boards so that his eyes were level with a 9-year-old girl's, the same way he'd been level with her on the mountain when she saved his life. Hey, he said through the glass. Chloe's father opened the door. And Chloe wheeled herself out onto the porch, slowly into the cold, into the silence, into the sea of 400 faces, and she stopped in front of Ryan Cole, and she said in a very small voice, the voice of a child bracing for the worst, "Why are you here?" And Ryan Cole, Raven, the man the world crossed streets to avoid, looked at the little girl who'd saved his life and answered, "Because you stopped for me," he said, "when nobody else would." Chloe's chin trembled. "That's it," she whispered. "That's the whole reason. You brought all of them, just for that." "Just for that," Ryan's voice cracked. "Chloe, you keep saying you're nobody. You said it to me on the mountain. You said it in the hospital. You said your whole life nobody sees you." He gestured behind him at 400 men and at 400 faces without ever taking his eyes off hers. "So I brought you everybody who ever felt the exact same way. Every man behind me got looked at once and thrown away. Every one of us knows what it's like to have the world decide who we are before we open our mouths. And you, his voice broke completely now. You're the only person in either of our whole lives who ever looked past it. So we came to look past yours." And then Ryan Cole did something that 400 men would talk about for the rest of their lives. He stood up, he turned to face the crowd of his brothers, and he said loud so the whole street could hear it, so the whole scared watching town could hear it, "Brothers." 400 men came to attention. "This is the girl I told you about," Ryan called out. "This is Chloe Anderson. This is the little girl in the wheelchair who pulled 12 of us off a frozen mountain, who told me I was too big to be stupid, who put her hand on my face in the snow and would not let me die." His voice rang off the houses. "And she thinks she's nobody. She thinks nobody sees her." He turned back to Chloe. "Show her boys," he said quietly. And 400 men all at once in one motion took off their helmets and their hats and held them over their hearts and bowed their heads to a 9-year-old girl in a wheelchair. Chloe made a sound, a tiny broken sound. Her hands came up over her mouth, and Sarah Anderson, watching from the doorway, sank down against the frame and slid to the floor with her hand pressed to her chest, because in 9 years of fighting for her daughter, in 9 years of watching the world look away from her baby, she had never not once imagined she would live to see this. 400 of the most feared men in America standing in the cold heads bowed, honoring her little girl. "I don't understand," Chloe kept saying. "I don't understand. I didn't do anything. I just called the tow truck. I just held your hand. That's not anything." "Chloe," Ryan knelt back down in front of her. "That's everything. Don't you get it, baby? That's the whole thing. That's the only thing that's ever mattered in the history of the world. Everybody's always waiting for somebody to hold their hand, and almost nobody ever does. And you did it without even thinking about it. You did it when it cost you your last bottle of water on that highway, before you did it on the mountain when it near froze you. You do it every single day for everybody in this town who's never once done it back for you." His voice dropped. "So, no, you don't get to call that not anything, not anymore. We're not going to let you." He gestured, and Tank came forward, carrying something covered in a cloth. "We brought you some things," Ryan said, "and I need you to let us give them to you. I know that's hard for you. I know you're the girl who decided a long time ago to never need anything, so you'd never be a burden on your mama and daddy." He watched her flinch, watched her realize he knew, watched her understand that her mother had told him. "Yeah, I know about that too. And I need you to hear me, Chloe. Taking something isn't being a burden. Sometimes taking something is the kindest thing you can do for the people who love you, because it lets them love you. You've been robbing your mama and daddy of the chance to give to you for years, baby, because you love them so much. And today we're going to teach you how to receive." "Okay, can you let us do that?" Chloe looked at her mother in the doorway. Her mother, crumpled on the floor, nodded through her tears. She looked at her father standing behind her chair, his ruined hand on her shoulder, weeping openly. She looked back at Ryan. "Okay," she whispered, and Tank pulled the cloth away. Underneath was a wheelchair, but not just a wheelchair. The most beautiful wheelchair Chloe had ever seen, gleaming, custom-fitted, built to grow with her, built to give her freedom, the kind of chair her parents had lain awake for years not being able to afford. And Chloe looked at it, and her hand crept to her mouth again, and she said, that costs so much. That costs more than we mama can't. It's paid for, Ryan said. Every penny, it's done, it's yours. Don't you worry for 1 second about what it costs, because that's not your job anymore. That was never supposed to be your job. But the chair, it turned out, was just the beginning. Because then Diesel came forward, 40 years of hard road on his face, and he crouched down and set an envelope in Chloe's lap. That's from the Cyprus chapter, he said gruffly. For your therapy, all of it. The stuff you had to stop last fall. It's back on, paid for 2 years out. Then another man came forward, and another. That's for your daddy's back, said one, setting down a second envelope. We heard he won't see a doctor because of the cost. That cost is handled now. He's going to get that fixed, and he's going to get to hold you without it hurting. Dan Anderson made a sound behind the chair, like something breaking. That's from the Georgia boys, said another man, and his voice shook and he was crying too. My little girl's in a chair like yours, cerebral palsy. She's 14 now. And when I told her about you, she said to tell you he had to stop. He had to breathe. She said to tell you that you're the bravest person she's ever heard of, and she's real proud to have a sister like you. And that word sister landed on Chloe like a physical thing, because Chloe Anderson had spent 9 years being an only child, being the girl at the edge of things, being the one nobody chose. And now a 14-year-old girl 3 states away, a girl she'd never met, was calling her sister. I have a sister, Chloe said to no one, to everyone. I have a sister, baby, Ryan said, and he could barely get it out now. You've got 400 of us. And then he reached behind Tank and he brought out one more thing, the vest. The little leather vest, child-sized, that Rosa had stitched through the whole night with tears running down her face. Ryan held it up, and he turned it so Chloe could see the back, so the whole street could see it. The girl who sees us, forever our sister. Chloe read it. She read it twice. And then this brave little girl, this girl who noticed everyone and needed nothing, who'd held it together through a blizzard and a hospital and 400 bowed heads, this little girl finally completely fell apart. She cried the way children cry when a hurt they've carried alone for years finally gets to come out. She cried great heaving sobs, and Ryan Cole gathered her up out of the chair gently, so gently, this enormous man cradling this tiny girl against his chest, and he held her while she shook, and he cried into her hair, and 400 men stood in the cold with their heads bowed and let them have it. You're not nobody, Ryan said into her hair over and over, rocking her. You hear me? You're not nobody. You're never going to be nobody again. You've got 400 brothers now, and every last one of us would ride through hell for you, and don't you ever, ever, ever let anybody tell you you don't matter. You matter more than anybody I've ever known. You matter so much, baby. You matter so much. And Chloe, against his chest, sobbed out the things she'd never said to a single living soul in her whole life. I was so lonely, she wept. I saw everybody my whole life, and nobody ever. I know. Ryan was rocking her, weeping, holding her like she was made of glass and steel both. I know, baby. I know. Nobody saw you back. Well, we see you now. You understand me? We see you. We're never going to stop seeing you. Somewhere in the crowd, a hardened man dropped to one knee and wept openly. Then another, and on the porches up and down Maple Street, the town that had come out afraid, the town that had whispered and braced and filled in the blanks with the worst possible story, that town stood witness to the truest thing most of them would ever see. And the shame of it and the beauty of it broke something open in them too. Old Mr. Perkins was crying. Mr. Perkins, who'd lived next door to the Andersons for 8 years and never once brought them so much as a casserole, stood on his porch with tears pouring down his old face, and finally understood what he'd been too afraid to see the whole time, that the miracle had been living next door to him all along, and it had taken 400 strangers to make him look. He came off his porch, slowly in his slippers in the cold, an old man crossing his frozen lawn. He walked up to the edge of the Anderson yard, and he stood there until Dan Anderson noticed him, and he said in a shaking voice, Dan, I've been a poor neighbor to you, to all of you. For 8 years I watched that little girl of yours, and I never once. His voice failed. Can an old fool make it right? Is it too late? Because I'd like to make it right. And Dan Anderson, who'd been given so much in the last 10 minutes that his heart couldn't hold any more, reached out and took his old neighbor's hand. It's never too late, Earl Perkins, Dan said. You just did. And that was the thing that started it spreading. Because once one person on Maple Street crossed a lawn, others followed. Mrs. Callahan was already there holding Sarah. The hardware store owner came with his wife. The gas station attendant. Parents who'd whispered in the parking lot came with their heads down and their hearts finally open. And one by one, the whole town that had been so afraid came to that little yard, not to gawk, but to be part of it, to finally do the thing that a 9-year-old girl in a wheelchair had been doing for all of them, all along, for free for years. To see somebody, by the time the news trucks finally showed up, and they did show up because you cannot hide 400 motorcycles in a small Tennessee town, what they found wasn't a story about a gang. What they found was a whole town in a front yard crying and 400 bikers on their knees, and a little girl in a brand new wheelchair wearing a tiny leather vest that said, "Forever our sister," being held by the biggest, most tattooed man any of those reporters had ever seen, who would not let go of her and who told the first reporter who stuck a microphone in his face just one thing. "Don't you write this about us, Ryan." Cole said, his voice thick, the little girl still tucked against his chest. "You write this about her. You put her name in it. Chloe Anderson. You tell everybody watching that there's a 9-year-old girl in Tennessee who saved 12 grown men's lives from a wheelchair and then told us she was nobody." His arms tightened around her. "And you tell them she was wrong. You tell the whole world she was wrong." And the reporter who had come looking for a scary story about a motorcycle gang lowered her microphone and just nodded because she couldn't speak either. Nobody could. Nobody on that whole street could speak. Because a girl who thought she was invisible had just been seen by 400 men and a whole town, and in a matter of hours by an entire country. And she would never, as long as she lived, be invisible again. The story went everywhere. By Monday morning, the girl who made 400 bikers ride was on every station in the country. The clip of 400 men bowing their heads to a little girl in a wheelchair had been watched millions of times before Chloe even finished her breakfast. Reporters called the house. A morning show sent a car. People Chloe had never met were crying about her in cities she'd never heard of. But Chloe Anderson didn't care about any of that. She cared about Monday. Because Monday meant school. And school meant the same classmates who'd whispered behind her back for years, the same boy Tyler who'd said she can't do anything anyway, the same hallway full of kids who'd spent years looking through her like she was made of glass. And here's the thing that tells you everything about Chloe. Even now, even after 400 men had knelt in her yard, some small scared part of her still braced for that hallway. Because a wheelchair and a fund and a leather vest can change your whole life in a weekend, but they can't quite reach 9 years of a child learning that school is where you go to be invisible. She almost didn't wear the vest. "You don't have to wear it, baby," Sarah said, watching her daughter turn it over and over in her hands at the breakfast table. "Not if it's too much, not if you're not ready." "I want to," Chloe said. "I'm just scared." "Scared of what, honey?" "That they'll laugh," Chloe whispered. "That they'll say I'm making it up. That they'll say a girl like me couldn't really—" She stopped. "That it'll go back to how it was, where I'm just the girl in the chair again." And that was the last echo of the old Chloe, the one who'd decided at 9 years old to make herself small so the world would let her be. Sarah knelt down beside her. "You put on that vest," she said, "and you go into that school, and if one single child says one single word, you remember who you belong to now. You remember whose sister you are, and you let them do the wondering for once." So Chloe put on the vest, and she wheeled into that school in her gleaming new chair with "The girl who sees us on her back," and she braced one last time for the worst. It never came, because the whole school had watched the clip too. She came through the front doors, and the hallway went quiet. Not the cruel quiet, she knew the quiet of being ignored, but a different quiet, a quiet full of eyes. And then a first grader she'd never spoken to, a tiny thing with pigtails, walked right up to her chair and said, "Are you the girl the motorcycles came for?" And before Chloe could answer, the little girl said, "My mama cried. She said, you're the bravest person in the whole world." And that was the crack in the dam. Suddenly there were kids everywhere around her chair, all talking at once, all wanting to know, was it real? Were there really 400? Did the big man really cry? What did the vest say? Could they see? Was it true she saved 12 men in a blizzard from her wheelchair? And Chloe, who had spent her whole life on the outside of every circle, found herself for the first time at the very center of one. Not because of pity, because of respect. And then the crowd parted, and there was Tyler, the boy who'd said she couldn't do anything. Standing there red-faced, not meeting her eyes, and the whole hallway went quiet again. The old quiet, almost everyone remembering, everyone waiting. Chloe, Tyler mumbled. He stopped, started again. I said something real mean to you, back before, in front of everybody, about how you can't do anything. He finally looked up, and his eyes were wet, and he was just a scared kid too, the way Chloe had always known he was. And then you went and saved 12 people's lives, and I've never even done anything. And you can't even walk, and you did more than anybody. And I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. The hallway held its breath. And Chloe Anderson, who saw everyone who'd shared her cookie with this exact boy an hour after he'd humiliated her, who had never once in her life let a hurt turn her mean, looked up at Tyler and did the only thing she'd ever known how to do. You just did something, she said gently. Tyler blinked. What? You just said sorry in front of everybody when you didn't have to. That's really hard. That's braver than what I did. She smiled at him, that same smile that had cracked open a Hell's Angel in a hospital bed. You did something, Tyler. You just did. And Tyler cried, right there in the hallway in front of everyone, and nobody laughed at him, because Chloe Anderson had just shown a whole school full of children the exact same thing she'd shown 400 grown men, that the kindest thing in the world is to look at a person who's braced to be judged and tell them what they got right instead. Mrs. Callahan watched the whole thing from her classroom door. She'd been teaching 22 years. She went inside and closed the door and had to sit down for a while. The months that followed changed everything, and not in the way Chloe expected. She thought the story would fade. Stories do. She figured in a month the reporters would move on, and the school would forget, and life would quiet back down. But the bikers didn't fade. That was the twist nobody outside the Brotherhood saw coming. The world thought it had watched a one-day miracle, a nice clip, a feel-good story to share and forget. But 400 men had meant what they said in that yard. You call, we come, forever. And they did not forget. Ryan Cole came back the next weekend, and the one after. He'd ride down from wherever the road had taken him, and he'd sit at the Anderson kitchen table, and he and Chloe would talk for hours. About everything. About nothing. About his sister, the one he'd lost, whose name Chloe learned one quiet afternoon had been Grace. You remind me of her, Ryan said, turning his coffee cup in his big scarred hands. Not how she looked, how she was. She saw people too. That's why it near killed me when you said you were nobody, because Grace used to say the same thing, and I never fixed it for her. I never got the chance. You're fixing it now, Chloe said, just with a different girl. That still counts. It counts double even. Ryan had to look out the window for a minute, and then he said the thing that changed the second half of the story. Chloe, I've been thinking. The club, we did a good thing for you, but there's kids like you all over. Kids in chairs, kids. Nobody sees kids whose families are drowning quiet the way yours was. And we've even got 400 men who just found out that helping one little girl felt better than anything any of us ever did in our whole lives. He set down his cup. What if we didn't stop? What if we made it a thing, a real thing with your name on it? Something that goes and finds the kids nobody sees and sees them. And so it was born at a kitchen table in the smallest house on Maple Street, over a cup of coffee between a 9-year-old girl and the man she'd pulled out of the snow. They called it Grace's Riders, named for the sister Ryan lost, run in spirit by the girl who reminded him of her. And it grew the way the story grew, fast and far and past anything anyone imagined. Chapters all over the country started doing it, finding the families who were drowning quiet, showing up. Not with pity, never with pity. Chloe was fierce about that. She made them promise, but the way they'd shown up for her, as brothers, as people who owed a debt to anybody brave enough to keep their heart open in a world that punishes you for it. They bought wheelchairs, they funded therapies, they fixed roofs and paid off medical bills, and more than any of that, they showed up so that some other kids somewhere would learn what Chloe learned in her front yard, that a crowd can come for you and not just at you. And every single child they helped got the same thing at the end. A little vest, with words on the back that Chloe chose herself for every one of them. Somebody sees you. Years passed. Chloe grew up. The chair grew with her just like the salesman built it to. Her father got his back fixed and held her without pain. Her mother finally slept. The red envelopes never came back to the kitchen table. And Chloe became something the 9-year-old girl in the too small chair could never have imagined. She traveled. She spoke to schools, to hospitals, to rooms full of kids in wheelchairs who looked at her the way she'd once looked at everybody else hungry to be seen. She'd wheel out onto a stage in front of hundreds of them, and she'd start every single time with the same words. "My name is Chloe Anderson," she'd say, "and when I was 9 years old, I thought I was nobody." And then she'd tell them the truth, that the smallest person in the room can start the biggest thing. That one bottle of water on a lonely highway, one hand held in the snow, one choice to stop when everybody else drives past, that's how it starts. Every time. That's how it always starts. Ryan came to every talk he could. He'd sit in the back, this graying mountain of a man, and he'd watch the little girl who'd saved his life stand up and save whole rooms of people at a time, and he never once made it through without crying. And on the day Chloe turned 18, 9 years, to the week after 400 motorcycles came down Maple Street, they threw her a party. And they didn't tell her the surprise. She heard it first, far off, a sound like thunder getting closer. She wheeled to the window the way she always would, the way she had her whole life, and there they were, coming down the street. Not 400 this time, more. Word had gone out, the girl who started it all was turning 18 and they'd come from everywhere. From every chapter of Grace's Riders, that her one act of kindness had spawned across the whole country. Men and women both now, and kids in wheelchairs riding in sidecars, every one of them wearing a little patch that said, "Somebody sees you," a patch that existed because a 9-year-old girl once decided a frightening stranger in the snow was worth stopping for. And leading them gray now, slower now, but sitting his bike as straight as he ever had, rode Ryan Cole. He pulled up in front of the house. He cut his engine. Hundreds cut theirs behind him. And it was quiet. He walked up the path slower than he used to, and Chloe wheeled out to meet him, a young woman now, and they stopped in front of each other exactly where they'd stopped 9 years before. "Why are you here?" Chloe asked. Same words, their words. And she was smiling and crying because she already knew the answer. And Ryan Cole, the man they'd once called Raven, the man the whole world used to cross the street to avoid, looked at the girl who'd pulled him out of the snow and out of 15 years of darkness and out of a life he'd been so sure he deserved to live alone. And he gave her the answer he'd give her every day for the rest of both their lives. "Because you stopped it for me," he said when nobody else would. And she reached out and took his big scarred hand in both of hers, the same way she had on a frozen mountain when she was 9 years old. Because that was the whole thing. That was all it had ever been. One person refusing to look away from another. One hand reaching for another hand in the cold. The girl everybody overlooked had become the person everybody remembered. And she had done it not by becoming loud or big or frightening or anything the world tells you that you have to become to matter. She'd done it by staying exactly who she'd always been. The girl who sees us, forever their sister. And that is the truest thing this old world will ever teach you, the smallest person in the room. The one nobody stops for, the one the whole world drives right past, that is so often the very person holding the one thing that can save us all. Chloe Anderson believed she was nobody. She was wrong. She was the reason 400 men remembered they had hearts. And you are not nobody either. Not to somebody. Never forget it.